People like you should never speak in rooms like this." Ethan Sterling didn't bother lowering his voice because he never imagined anyone would challenge him. The words landed with the weight of polished marble, cutting through the quiet elegance of the Grand Meridian Hotel in downtown Chicago, where crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across imported Italian stone floors, and a string quartet floated softly beneath the conversations of executives worth more than some small countries. Forks paused halfway to expensive plates. Crystal glasses hovered in midair. Even the waitstaff slowed their steps for the briefest moment before pretending nothing had happened. That was how power worked in rooms like this. It didn't need permission. It expected silence. Ethan stood near the center of the private ballroom, surrounded by venture capitalists, Fortune 500 executives, university trustees, and media personalities who all wanted a few minutes of his attention. At 38, the billionaire founder and CEO of Sterling Dynamics had built an empire that reached from artificial intelligence to advanced medical technology, earning magazine covers that praised his brilliance almost as often as they criticized his impossible standards. Investors admired his confidence. Employees respected his vision. Critics called him ruthless. Ethan preferred one word: accurate. He believed he could size up a person within seconds simply by observing how they dressed, spoke, and carried themselves. To him, success left clues, and failure did too. So when a young black waitress quietly reached across the table to replace an untouched glass of sparkling water, he barely looked at her before deciding exactly who she was. Naomi Brooks wore the same neatly pressed black uniform as every other server in the ballroom. Her name tag reflected the chandelier above her. Her hair was pulled back with simple elegance, her posture perfectly straight despite hours spent walking between tables, and her calm expression never shifted as conversations rose and fell around her. She moved with the confidence of someone who understood every inch of the room without ever trying to own it. Most guests never noticed her. Ethan noticed only enough to dismiss her. "Just refill the glasses," he added with a faint smile that carried no warmth. "Leave the thinking to the people at the table." A few uncomfortable laughs drifted across the room. Some guests lowered their eyes toward their plates. Others exchanged quick glances before returning to their conversations, choosing comfort over courage as they often did whenever influence entered the room. Naomi simply nodded once. She neither argued nor apologized. Her steady eyes met Ethan's for less than a second before she continued serving the next guest with the same quiet professionalism she had shown all evening. There was no anger in her expression, no embarrassment, only composure. Somehow that calm unsettled the room far more than any argument could have. Ethan dismissed it immediately. In his experience, silence usually meant agreement. He had no way of knowing that the woman carrying a silver tray had spent years inside lecture halls far more demanding than any corporate boardroom. He had no reason to imagine that behind the plain uniform stood someone whose achievements could not be measured by designer suits, luxury watches, or private jets. Around them, the gala continued beneath glittering lights and polished speeches celebrating innovation, leadership, and the future of American excellence. Yet without anyone realizing it, the most extraordinary mind in the ballroom was not standing behind the podium. She was quietly collecting empty glasses while the richest man in the room congratulated himself for believing he had already figured her out. Naomi Brooks had learned years ago that the people who spoke the loudest about excellence were not always the ones who recognized it. She carried another tray through the ballroom with steady hands while conversations about innovation echoed beneath the towering chandeliers. Every table sounded almost identical. Executives discussed market expansion. Investors debated artificial intelligence. University donors praised the importance of education. The irony would have been amusing if it had not been so familiar. They celebrated knowledge while overlooking the woman quietly serving their dinner. Naomi had become accustomed to that contradiction. She greeted every guest with the same warm professionalism, replacing silverware, refilling sparkling water, and collecting empty plates with movements so precise they almost disappeared into the rhythm of the evening. A veteran server named Linda leaned toward her as they passed near the service station. "Are you all right?" she whispered without stopping. Naomi offered a gentle smile. "I am fine." Linda glanced toward Ethan Sterling across the ballroom before shaking her head. Some people confuse confidence with kindness. Naomi simply adjusted the folded linen napkin resting over her arm. "Everyone carries something invisible," she answered quietly. "Some carry burdens. Others carry assumptions." Linda looked as though she wanted to ask another question, but the kitchen doors swung open and another wave of plated dinners arrived. The evening continued without interruption. Naomi moved from table to table with remarkable composure, earning quiet thank yous from guests who barely noticed her face and impatient gestures from those who never looked up from their conversations. None of it changed her expression. Long before she had ever worn a server's uniform, she had spent countless nights inside university libraries where silence stretched until sunrise, and every answer demanded another question. She remembered worn notebooks filled with handwritten equations, stacks of research papers balanced beside cups of cold coffee, and professors who challenged every conclusion because they believed true understanding required humility before certainty. Those years had shaped her more than any diploma ever could. Knowledge, she had learned, was never about proving someone else wrong. It was about continuing to learn after everyone assumed the lesson was over. That belief stayed with her now as she carried another tray past the ballroom stage where a large screen displayed the evening's theme in bright gold letters: "Building Tomorrow Through Brilliant Minds." The audience applauded as one keynote speaker praised education as the foundation of progress. Naomi almost smiled at the timing. Across the room, Ethan accepted another handshake from an influential investor while confidently explaining how his company recruited only the brightest talent in America. His words drew admiration from everyone surrounding him. He spoke with certainty, the kind that convinced people because it never seemed to leave room for doubt. Yet every few moments his eyes drifted back toward Naomi, not because she had interrupted him, but because she had not. Her silence refused to become the reaction he expected. It lingered in his thoughts like an unanswered question. Before he could dismiss it again, the ballroom entrance opened and several distinguished guests stepped inside together. Among them was Dr. Benjamin Harper, a nationally respected professor whose published research had influenced universities across the country. Conversations softened as people recognized him immediately. Organizers hurried forward to welcome the unexpected arrival, while cameras quietly shifted toward the entrance. Ethan straightened his jacket with a confident smile, eager to greet another accomplished mind. Naomi noticed the professor only briefly as she carried a fresh pitcher of water toward the head table. The moment lasted no more than a heartbeat. Yet when Dr. Harper glanced across the ballroom, his eyes paused on her face for an instant longer than chance alone could explain. Dr. Benjamin Harper was not the kind of man who entered a room unnoticed. At 64, the renowned professor from Northwestern University had spent 4 decades shaping the careers of scientists, physicians, and researchers whose discoveries reached far beyond lecture halls. His calm presence carried more authority than the expensive suits surrounding him because respect followed him naturally rather than being demanded. The organizers quickly welcomed him to the front of the ballroom, apologizing that his flight delay had nearly caused him to miss the gala. Ethan Sterling stepped forward with the polished confidence that had become second nature after years of leading billion-dollar negotiations. They exchanged a firm handshake beneath the glow of countless camera flashes while nearby guests quietly admired the meeting of two influential figures. Ethan had funded several educational initiatives through his foundation, and Dr. Harper had served on advisory boards connected to those programs. They knew each other professionally, though not personally. "Professor Harper, it is an honor to finally see you in person," Ethan said with an easy smile. "Your work has inspired a great deal of innovation." Harper returned the handshake politely. "Innovation begins with curiosity," he replied. "The rest depends on whether people continue learning after success convinces them they already know enough." Ethan laughed softly, assuming it was simply another academic observation. Around them, investors gathered closer, hoping to hear a conversation between two respected leaders. The moderator invited Dr. Harper to join the head table before the evening's discussion panel. As everyone settled into their seats, a server quietly approached to refill water glasses. Naomi moved with the same measured grace she had shown throughout the evening, carefully placing a fresh pitcher on the linen-covered table without interrupting anyone. Dr. Harper looked up for only a moment before his expression changed almost imperceptibly. His eyes followed her as she continued serving the next guest. Something about her seemed unexpectedly familiar, although he said nothing. Ethan noticed the brief glance, but thought little of it. To him, Naomi remained another member of the hotel staff, completing routine work behind the scenes. The moderator welcomed everyone before introducing the topic of the evening, artificial intelligence and the future of education. Questions moved from workforce development to research funding, and each speaker offered polished answers that earned steady applause. Then a venture capitalist posed a more difficult question. If universities are producing more graduates than ever, why are breakthrough discoveries becoming increasingly rare? A thoughtful silence settled across the ballroom. Several executives shared theories about investment cycles, economic pressures, and changing technology. Others suggested that modern education rewarded memorization instead of independent thinking. Dr. Harper listened patiently without interrupting. Finally, he folded his hands and smiled. "Interesting answers," he said. "But allow me to offer a different perspective. The greatest obstacle to discovery is not the lack of intelligence. It is the habit of dismissing unexpected voices before they are fully heard." The room grew noticeably quieter. Ethan nodded politely, although he believed the comment was largely philosophical. Before anyone could respond, Dr. Harper reached into his jacket pocket and removed a folded note containing a short research question that he often used to challenge graduate students during seminars. He placed it gently on the table. "Perhaps," he said with a warm smile, "someone here would enjoy solving a problem that has started many fascinating conversations inside my classroom." Guests leaned forward with genuine curiosity. Executives exchanged confident smiles, certain that among so many accomplished leaders, someone would quickly provide the correct answer. Naomi happened to be standing only a few feet away, quietly collecting empty glasses as the professor unfolded the paper that would change the direction of the entire evening. The folded sheet of paper rested at the center of the round table, like an invitation no one wanted to accept too quickly. Dr. Benjamin Harper adjusted his glasses before sliding the question toward the group. It was not a trick or a puzzle meant for entertainment. It was a real research problem, one designed to test reasoning rather than memory, the kind that rewarded patience instead of confidence. The moderator smiled politely. "This should be interesting." Several guests leaned closer. A venture capitalist scanned the page first, frowned slightly, and quietly passed it to the executive beside him. Another attendee offered an answer filled with impressive terminology, but Dr. Harper simply nodded without confirming anything. The discussion continued for several minutes as respected leaders proposed increasingly complicated explanations, each sounding convincing until another expert pointed out a flaw. The atmosphere shifted from relaxed networking to quiet competition. Everyone wanted to be the first person to impress the professor. Ethan Sterling accepted the page with complete confidence. He studied the question carefully, then spoke with the certainty that had made him famous in boardrooms across the country. His explanation was clear, logical, and delivered with remarkable authority. Several guests immediately nodded in agreement, and one investor even applauded softly before Ethan finished speaking. For a brief moment, it seemed the discussion had reached its conclusion. Dr. Harper remained thoughtful. "An elegant argument," he said kindly, "but it overlooks one important variable." Ethan's smile faded just enough for those nearest the table to notice. "Which variable?" he asked. Rather than answering directly, the professor gently turned the paper around and pointed to a single line near the bottom of the page. Ethan read it again, then once more. His expression remained composed, but the confidence in his eyes shifted ever so slightly. He offered a revised explanation, this time more cautiously. Dr. Harper thanked him for the effort, but still did not confirm the answer. Around the ballroom, conversations became whispers. People who had admired Ethan's certainty only minutes earlier now watched with growing curiosity. Near the edge of the table, Naomi quietly replaced an empty coffee cup with a fresh one before reaching for another plate. As she glanced toward the paper for only a brief second, her eyes lingered almost instinctively on one mathematical expression before moving away again. It was barely noticeable. She continued her work without slowing her pace. Dr. Harper happened to catch that fleeting glance. His eyes narrowed thoughtfully, not with suspicion but with recognition. He had spent a lifetime teaching students, and he knew the difference between someone reading words and someone evaluating ideas. Ethan noticed the professor looking toward Naomi and followed his gaze. A faint smile returned to his face, this time edged with quiet amusement. "Professor," he said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "I hope we are not waiting for the catering staff to solve a graduate-level research problem." A few restrained laughs drifted through the ballroom. Some guests looked uncomfortable, while others smiled politely without joining in. Naomi continued collecting dishes as though she had heard nothing at all. Dr. Harper did not laugh. Instead, he watched Naomi for another silent moment before speaking in the calm voice that had guided thousands of students through moments of uncertainty. "Sometimes," he said, "the smartest person in the room is the one everyone else assumes has nothing to contribute." His words settled over the ballroom with surprising weight. Ethan offered a courteous smile, convinced the professor was speaking in general principles rather than making any specific point. He leaned back in his chair, certain the evening would soon return to normal. He had no idea that within the next few minutes, the assumptions he trusted most would begin to unravel one careful sentence at a time. Dr. Benjamin Harper slowly lifted the folded page from the table and looked around the ballroom with the quiet patience of someone who had spent an entire career watching brilliant minds wrestle with difficult questions. "There is no prize for answering first," he said with a gentle smile, "only for understanding why the answer is correct." The room settled into thoughtful silence once again. Several executives returned to studying the problem, while others quietly admitted defeat, choosing instead to sip coffee and observe. Ethan Sterling remained composed, although the challenge lingered in his thoughts. He disliked unanswered questions, especially in front of people whose respect mattered. As Naomi approached to refill another water glass, Dr. Harper spoke without taking his eyes off the paper. "Excuse me, Mississippi." Naomi paused politely. "Yes, sir? Did you happen to glance at this question a moment ago?" She hesitated for only an instant before answering honestly. "Only briefly." Ethan smiled with restrained amusement. "Professor, I think we have already asked enough of the hotel staff tonight." A few guests exchanged uncertain smiles, unsure whether to laugh. Dr. Harper ignored the remark completely. "Would you mind telling us what caught your attention?" Naomi remained standing beside the table, still holding the polished silver pitcher. She looked at the page once more before speaking carefully. "I may be mistaken," she said softly, "but I do not believe the problem begins where everyone has been looking." Several heads turned toward her. Ethan folded his arms with quiet confidence. "Go on." Naomi leaned forward slightly, careful not to touch the paper. "Everyone assumes the final equation is the source of the contradiction. I believe the assumption made in the third line changes the entire framework before the equation is even reached. If that assumption is adjusted, the apparent conflict disappears naturally." The ballroom became noticeably quieter. Dr. Harper did not respond immediately. Instead, he studied Naomi's face with growing interest. "Why do you think that?" he asked. Naomi answered with remarkable calm. "Because the model treats two independent conditions as though they remain constant throughout the experiment. In practice, they influence each other continuously. Once that relationship is acknowledged, the conclusion changes." Several professors seated near the back of the room straightened in their chairs. One quietly asked for another copy of the page. Another began taking notes on a napkin. Ethan's expression remained confident, but a faint crease appeared across his forehead. He reread the question yet again, this time focusing on the exact section Naomi had mentioned. For the first time that evening, he did not immediately find a counterargument. Dr. Harper smiled, though only slightly. "Interesting." He turned toward the audience. "Would anyone care to evaluate her observation?" The discussion restarted with completely different energy. This time no one spoke over Naomi or dismissed her idea outright. Instead, respected executives and researchers carefully examined the reasoning she had offered. One after another, they slowly reached the same conclusion. The overlooked assumption truly altered the entire analysis. What had appeared to be a difficult problem only minutes earlier suddenly became surprisingly elegant. Ethan remained silent. His confidence had not disappeared, but certainty had given way to curiosity. Across the ballroom, even the musicians seemed quieter as conversations faded into attentive whispers. Dr. Harper looked back at Naomi with unmistakable admiration. "Miss Brooks," he asked warmly, "have we met before?" Naomi smiled with the same calm grace she had carried throughout the evening. "A long time ago, Professor," she replied. I'm not sure you would remember. Dr. Harper's thoughtful expression deepened as fragments of memory slowly returned, and before another word was spoken, everyone at the table sensed that the evening was about to reveal a story none of them had expected. Dr. Benjamin Harper studied Naomi Brooks for another long moment before a slow smile spread across his face, the kind that appears only when memory finally catches up with recognition. He took one careful step away from the table, as though the ballroom around him had quietly disappeared. "No," he said softly. "I remember now." Every conversation in the room faded into silence. Guests who had been reaching for coffee stopped halfway. Even Ethan Sterling found himself watching more closely than he intended. Harper nodded with unmistakable certainty. "You were the doctoral researcher who challenged my keynote presentation at the National Symposium in Boston 5 years ago." Naomi lowered her eyes modestly. "I asked a question, Professor." Harper chuckled warmly. "You did much more than ask a question. You presented an entirely different framework, and after reviewing your paper, I admitted that your interpretation was stronger than my own." A wave of surprise moved through the ballroom. Several professors exchanged startled glances. One attendee quietly whispered, "Wait, I remember that conference." Another looked at Naomi with growing disbelief. Ethan remained perfectly still. His expression revealed nothing, but his attention had become absolute. Harper continued, his voice carrying naturally across the elegant room. "Your dissertation explored adaptive learning systems with dynamic behavioral modeling. If I remember correctly, it earned unanimous approval from your doctoral committee." Naomi smiled gently. "I was fortunate to work with exceptional mentors." Harper shook his head. "Humility has always been one of your greatest strengths." Ethan looked from Harper to Naomi, trying to reconcile the woman standing quietly with a silver water pitcher and the researcher the professor was describing. It felt impossible. Nothing about the evening fit the assumptions he had confidently made only an hour earlier. One of the university trustees leaned forward with genuine curiosity. "Dr. Brooks, are you still conducting research?" Naomi paused before answering. "Not at the moment." "Why not?" another guest asked. Her smile remained calm. "Life does not always follow the timeline we expect. After my mother became seriously ill, my priorities changed. When she passed away, I needed stable work immediately to support my younger brother while he finished college. This position gave me flexible hours, reliable income, and enough time to help my family rebuild." There was no bitterness in her voice. She stated the facts as simply as someone describing the weather. That quiet honesty carried more weight than any dramatic speech could have. Around the room, several guests lowered their eyes, suddenly remembering how easily they had overlooked her throughout the evening. Ethan replayed every word he had spoken since arriving at the gala. Every assumption, every casual remark. None of them sounded the same anymore. Harper reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and carefully removed a business card. "The university has been searching for someone to lead a new interdisciplinary research initiative," he said. "We have interviewed candidates from across the country, yet I cannot think of anyone whose combination of intellect, resilience, and character better fits the role." Naomi accepted the card respectfully, but did not look at it immediately. "Thank you, Professor. That is very generous." Harper smiled. "It is not generosity. It is recognition." Those words settled over the ballroom with remarkable force. For the first time that evening, no one saw a waitress standing beside the table. They saw a scholar whose achievements had been hidden beneath a neatly pressed uniform. Ethan Sterling quietly looked down at the empty water glass in front of him, realizing that the person he had considered least qualified to speak had understood the room better than anyone else from the very beginning. The silence that settled over the ballroom felt different now. It was no longer the uneasy quiet that follows an uncomfortable remark. It was the kind of silence that arrives when an entire room realizes it has been looking at someone through the wrong lens. Guests who had barely acknowledged Naomi Brooks all evening now watched every movement she made. The same black uniform had not changed. The silver pitcher in her hand had not changed. Only their understanding had. Ethan Sterling slowly rose from his chair, not because anyone asked him to, but because remaining seated suddenly felt impossible. He looked across the table at Naomi with an expression no one in the room had ever associated with him. Uncertainty. For years he had built a reputation on making quick judgments. Investors praised his instinct. Boards trusted his decisions. Recruiters admired his ability to identify talent within minutes. Yet standing only a few feet away was living proof that confidence without humility could become its own blind spot. Dr. Benjamin Harper broke the silence first. "Do you remember the closing sentence of your dissertation defense?" he asked with a smile. Naomi laughed softly, almost embarrassed. "Only because you asked me to repeat it twice." Harper nodded. "Please share it again." Naomi hesitated before answering. She never enjoyed becoming the center of attention, but the professor's request deserved respect. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of executives, investors, scholars, hotel staff, and finally Ethan himself. Then she spoke with the same calm voice she had used all evening. "Knowledge loses its purpose the moment it becomes a reason to believe we are better than someone else." No one moved. No one interrupted. Even the musicians quietly lowered their instruments as though the sentence itself deserved to be heard without distraction. Harper smiled proudly. "That is why I never forgot your work." A member of the university board quietly reached for his phone and searched Naomi's name. Within seconds his eyes widened. Her dissertation was published, he said almost to himself. It has been cited hundreds of times. Another guest looked over his shoulder. She also received the National Emerging Research Award. More phones appeared around the ballroom. Guests who had arrived expecting another networking dinner now discovered articles, conference programs, academic journals, and photographs of Naomi presenting research years earlier. The evidence spread across the room faster than any introduction ever could. Ethan watched each reaction unfold with growing disbelief. The facts were undeniable. Everything Dr. Harper had said was true. Naomi had never exaggerated her accomplishments because she had never mentioned them at all. She had allowed people to reveal themselves through the assumptions they chose to make. Ethan quietly exhaled. "Dr. Brooks," he said, his voice noticeably softer than before, "I owe you an apology." Every eye turned toward him. For a man known for certainty, those words carried enormous weight. Naomi offered a gentle smile that held neither triumph nor resentment. "You do not owe me an apology for not knowing my story," she answered. "None of us can know everything about the people we meet." Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. "No," he replied, "but I judged your value before giving you the chance to speak. That part was entirely my choice." The honesty in his voice surprised even those who knew him well. Across the ballroom, several executives quietly reflected on conversations they had held throughout their own careers, wondering how many remarkable people they had overlooked for similar reasons. The evening had begun as a celebration of innovation, yet its greatest lesson had nothing to do with technology. It had everything to do with the dangerous habit of confusing appearance with ability, and for the first time that night, Ethan Sterling understood that the most expensive mistake a leader could make was not overlooking an opportunity. It was overlooking a person. Ethan Sterling remained standing for several seconds after the conversation had moved on, as though he were still trying to catch up with a reality that had quietly shifted beneath his feet. Around him, the ballroom slowly came back to life, but nothing sounded quite the same. Conversations that had once revolved around acquisitions, investment strategies, and market forecasts now centered on Naomi Brooks. University trustees discussed her published research with genuine admiration. Business leaders searched for her academic articles and shared them across their phones. Even members of the hotel staff exchanged proud smiles as they watched someone they had worked beside every day receive the recognition she had never demanded. Ethan observed it all without saying another word. For perhaps the first time in many years, he understood what it felt like to become the quietest person in the room. One of his longtime investors, Michael Reynolds, stepped beside him with a thoughtful expression. "Interesting evening," he said calmly. Ethan nodded. "That is one way to describe it." Michael looked toward Naomi, who had already resumed helping another server organize dessert plates as though nothing extraordinary had happened. "She had every opportunity to embarrass you," Michael said. Instead, she chose dignity. Ethan followed his gaze. "I noticed." Michael folded his hands. "That tells me more about her character than any academic award ever could." Those words settled heavily in Ethan's mind. He had spent years believing leadership meant speaking with certainty, moving quickly, and trusting instinct above all else. Tonight, instinct had failed him because it had been built upon appearances rather than understanding. Across the ballroom, Dr. Benjamin Harper continued speaking with several university representatives. One dean quietly remarked that institutions often search the entire country for exceptional talent, while extraordinary people sometimes stood directly in front of them unnoticed. Harper smiled knowingly. Talent reveals itself, he replied. Character chooses whether to announce it. Naomi overheard the conversation only briefly as she carried another tray toward the kitchen. She neither slowed her pace nor joined the discussion. The evening was still her work shift, and she intended to finish it with the same professionalism with which it had begun. That quiet consistency impressed the guests even more than the discoveries they had made about her past. Ethan finally walked toward the service station where Naomi was organizing clean glasses. He stopped several feet away, careful not to interrupt her work. "Dr. Brooks," he said respectfully, "may I ask you one question?" Naomi looked up with the same calm expression she had worn all evening. "Of course." Ethan hesitated before speaking, choosing his words more carefully than he had at any point since entering the ballroom. "After everything that happened tonight, why did you continue serving everyone as though nothing had changed?" Naomi smiled gently before placing another polished glass onto the tray. "Because my work did not change." Ethan looked puzzled. She continued quietly. "A person's dignity should never depend on whether other people recognize their accomplishments. If I only respected my job after someone respected me, then my values would belong to other people instead of myself." Ethan lowered his eyes as the meaning settled in. There was no lecture in her voice, no bitterness, only quiet conviction earned through experience. Nearby guests who happened to overhear the exchange remained silent, recognizing that they were witnessing something far more valuable than a business negotiation. Ethan slowly extended his hand. This time it was not the confident handshake of a billionaire introducing himself. It was the sincere gesture of one human being acknowledging another with the respect that should have been offered from the very beginning. Naomi accepted the handshake with a warm smile, and in that simple moment the balance of power disappeared, replaced by something far more enduring than status, wealth, or titles. It was mutual respect, earned not through success alone, but through humility finally finding its rightful place. The final guests slowly made their way toward the ballroom doors, their conversations quieter than when the evening had begun. Business cards had been exchanged, investment ideas had been discussed, and future partnerships had been explored, yet none of those topics remained at the center of people's minds. Instead, they carried with them the memory of a woman whose greatest accomplishment had not been solving a difficult research problem or earning a doctoral degree. It had been refusing to let another person's assumptions define her character. Naomi Brooks stood near the service station beside the other members of the hotel staff, helping fold linen napkins and organize the last collection of polished glasses before the ballroom closed for the night. Her shift ended exactly as it had begun, with quiet focus and genuine professionalism. She did not linger for congratulations or search for recognition. She simply completed the responsibilities she had accepted when she arrived that afternoon. Dr. Benjamin Harper approached one final time before leaving. "The position I mentioned will remain available," he said warmly. "Whenever you are ready, the university would be honored to welcome you." Naomi accepted the invitation with sincere gratitude. "Thank you, Professor. I will think about it carefully." Harper smiled. "I know you will. That is one reason I have always respected you." He shook her hand and quietly departed, leaving behind not only an opportunity, but a reminder that true mentors never forget the people who challenge them to grow. Ethan Sterling watched the exchange from across the nearly empty ballroom. The bright lights that had once reflected confidence now seemed softer, almost reflective. He walked toward the exit, then paused before reaching the doors. Turning back, he found Naomi placing the final stack of folded napkins onto a service cart. "Dr. Brooks," he called gently. She looked up with the same calm smile. Ethan reached into his jacket and removed his business card. "If you ever decide to return to private industry, Sterling Dynamics would benefit from someone with your perspective. Not simply because of your education, but because tonight you reminded me of something I should have learned years ago." Naomi accepted the card respectfully. "Thank you." Ethan smiled. "Whether you ever call or not, I hope you know this offer comes with genuine respect." Naomi nodded. "That means more than you realize." They shook hands once more, not as a billionaire executive and a hotel waitress, not as someone with power and someone without it, but as two professionals who finally saw each other clearly. As Ethan stepped outside into the cool Chicago night, the city lights reflected across the glass towers that had long symbolized achievement in his world. Yet the greatest lesson of the evening had not been found inside a boardroom, a quarterly report, or a billion-dollar negotiation. It had been discovered beside a dinner table through a conversation he almost prevented from happening. Inside the ballroom, Naomi removed her name tag at the end of her shift and slipped it carefully into her apron pocket before gathering her coat. The uniform had never diminished who she was, just as her doctorate had never made her more worthy of dignity than anyone else in the room. It had simply revealed how often people mistake appearances for identity. She quietly walked through the employee entrance and disappeared into the evening without applause, without celebration, and without asking anyone to remember her name. Yet long after the chandeliers dimmed and the ballroom doors closed, everyone who had witnessed that extraordinary night remembered something far more important. Titles can open doors. Wealth can command attention. Reputation can fill a room. But none of those things reveal the true measure of a person. Character does. And sometimes the wisest voice is the one we almost never allow ourselves to hear.